So for this week, I decided I would like to try to do a talk instead of a write, just to see if it would help me get my I guess thoughts and ideas across better than a write, because I feel as though I haven't been communicating my thoughts on paper as well as I'd like to off of a tree map. It's kind of hard to transfer knowledge back and forth from my head to a map, back to another map, and then onto a paper. I don't know, I feel like it's not working for me as well. So this week was emotional behavior disorders and ACEs, and you asked us to blend those. So for my map, I drew my map in a way that I felt was a visual representation of how I see the two blended together. For me, I feel like emotional behavior disorders is kind of the sole purpose, but behind that, we're looking what is really causing the problem. How can we fix it? The biggest quote, I guess, I picked up that really stuck with me, and I really only wrote one green frame because for me it was kind of the biggest thing that I took away from this week, and that was Nadine Burke Harris's quote: "Shift your thinking from what's wrong with you to what happened to you." So in the picture, I guess I took, so here's what we see. This is what's wrong with you. This is the label they're given, and that's not the focus. We need to dig deeper and find what the root of the problem is, what's beneath what we see. So I drew a literal tree, so hence the tree map is not just a tree map. It's literally, I'm looking at the root of the problem. And in this week, we talked about ACEs can be a common problem amongst many of the students labeled with emotional behavior disorder. So to start by talking about emotional behavior disorders, as a teacher, I wanted to remember a few different things that I've noted up here, starting with don't ever write the students off. It's important to not ignore the students. Don't pretend that, they are incapable of learning, because every student is so capable of learning, and it's just about finding a way to support that student the way they need best to learn, I guess. The next thing with that is obviously you might have to work with that student in a different way. So, sorry, I keep moving on. So with emotional behavior disorders, obviously something's going on. They cannot focus the same way as other students can, whether that be like extreme anxiety or fear or lack of focus, whatever it may be. You have to work around those obstacles and figure out different ways that you can work with them that'll benefit them the most. Next, with emotional behavior disorders, it's important to realize that a lot of times these behaviors are clearly misunderstood. They are not what you see. You are seeing basically a cover-up of another problem. That is all it is. So I think it's fair to call them misbehaviors, which we found out in the reading, and we talked about it, that the behavior is not what it seems. So for example, we talked about in class the student who was not answering questions, not turning in work. If someone did call him out, the student just shut down completely, was not answering, and it may be portrayed as stubbornness, or someone who is rebelling and just trying not to hand anything in. But if you looked at the underlying cause of that student, it was very much so a big anxiety problem, and fearfulness of certain teachers, and fearfulness of sounding stupid. And it's kind of sad because a lot of teachers could easily easily just be frustrated and try and kind of pick a war with that student and beat them at it when that student's already at war with themselves. And so by picking a war with them again, you're just making you're making one problem bigger or creating more problems that don't need to be there. So the misbehavior leads me to, it's obviously misunderstood. There's something else. What is the underlying cause? What's the underlying cause? So then we go down and we look at the root problem. Now with students, a lot of times you won't actually know their ACEs or figure out their ACE scores. But I think it's important as a teacher just to be aware that we know ACEs are common. There's almost every person has at least one mark, I think. Can at least put one mark down on their ACE test or something. We talked about that. And that shocked me completely, but I guess it's the realistic view of our world. So the next thing was that I just learned, like, ACEs wasn't something I was even aware of, so that was kind of enlightening just to, be aware of it, because it's important as a teacher to be aware. Even if we don't know their ACE score, we need to be aware that there's something else going on behind it, whether it be abuse, neglect, mental illness in the family. There could be divorce. Yeah, it's alcoholism, drugs, anything can fit under that adverse childhood experiences category. Pretty heartbreaking situations too. So if a student is going through something like that and you're not aware of it, they're obviously dealing with something that's probably going to take over their mindset more than school. So when they're at school, they're obviously thinking about other things, or their reactions, or what am I trying to say? Their responses might not be portrayed correctly just because they have other things on their mind. They aren't necessarily able to focus on the content you're teaching. It's not important enough to them at that time. So finding ways to help them, just, even if you don't know what's going on at home, finding ways to let them just forget about maybe what else is going on in their life and just kind of take the moment to relax and hold on, slow things down. Let's focus and just kind of work slowly on what we got in front of us here. How can it help them in other ways? I guess too, maybe even if it's just something that turns out to be more of a stress reliever rather than something that adds more stress to these students. ACE scores also take a physical toll on students. They say as ACE scores go up, their studies show that health scores go down. This has something to do with the survival mode that they go on. These students who have experienced a lot of the adverse childhood experiences, their body is put into a state of fight or flight a lot, or it could even be a freeze syndrome. Their bodies are constantly having to create the process where basically it adds a lot more blood pumping to your heart, and this can take a physical toll if it's happening more often than it should. And once you kind of start that one process that's physically hurting your body, it's going to roll or snowball into more and more things, whether it be not getting enough sleep or simple things like that, but they all add up, and this contributes to those students' misbehaviors. Another thing is that survival adaptations that they have created, because they use them so often, they can very much so clash with the social expectations that you have for students. So if you are expecting a student to respond in a certain way, you ask a student to maybe answer this question, and it might seem like the most simple question ever. Well, the student has created some type of idea or they've adapted a way to kind of keep them safe from sounding stupid by answering that question, or they've created ways to keep themselves from getting hurt, or whatever they have used to adapt has maybe, say, given them this process that they don't answer the question. So you ask them the question, there is no response. You're not going to get it out of them because they have literally created a survival adaptation where they believe that they cannot answer that question, and the best way to go about their life is to just sit and ignore anything going on around them. So trying to pry them out of that is obviously not going to be beneficial to their learning. The other thing is the video that we watched by Nadine Burke-Harris talked about roller coaster worlds and slide worlds. This was a little bit confusing for me, but what I got from it was, or my take on it was, these students need structure, basically. A roller coaster world is going to be up and down and side to side and very unpredictable. You don't know what's coming next. And a slide world, you can see, you're gonna start going down and you're gonna hit the ground and then you're gonna stop, and you can see exactly what's happening. You know what's going on. For these students who have all these different survival adaptations and underlying issues beneath their behaviors, they need structure and consistency, and you need to discover what works for them, and you need to stick with that, and that will kind of contribute to let's say, the resiliency compass. Yeah, we'll kind of take it up to that. It'll contribute to that just because you're in that cycle. And if you take something away from that compass, it kind of breaks that circle, and then their world starts falling apart again, and they're going to fall back into those old behaviors that they had learned and adaptations that they have trained themselves to use to help themselves feel safe in the end. So a roller coaster world just isn't a good fit for the classroom. You don't want to be like throwing things at them and curveballs and inconsistency all the time. Like, structure is key to their success, and being consistent as a teacher as well is very, very important for all students, not just students with an emotional behavior disorder. We're going to go back up to the emotional behavior disorder. So after you're aware of the fact that there's something else going on, and it's not just the student making something up and just misbehaving just to misbehave, you can start to begin to figure out what can you do to help them. So you need to learn what makes them tick. What works for them? What are they missing from their resiliency compass? What's causing them to act out in ways that are not socially acceptable or expected in the classroom? So finding what they need and using that to motivate the students and take them from, someone who maybe never answered a question to, even if they're just answering a question, to just you and no one else is in the room. That's like one little step. And constantly have this, larger goal, set goals. I didn't put that in here, but it's important to set a goal for that student and, make a pretty high goal, because these students are 100% capable. And I think that's the biggest thing, is don't ever underestimate that student just because they were given a label. They can completely overcome whatever it is they're dealing with, and with your support and consistent role as a teacher in the classroom, you can really make a difference in that student's life. And that is probably the most rewarding thing as a teacher. And emotional behavior disorders shouldn't be viewed as a negative thing. They're definitely something that, as a teacher, it will be a challenge, but it'll be a very rewarding one. And it's kind of what we should expect to deal with in the classroom, and be excited to help make differences, whether they're big or small, in a student's life. And with emotional behavior disorders, it can be huge to them. So that was pretty awesome. So that's what I've got for my notes this week.